Hey everyone, how's it? Wow, that is loud. Goodness me. Hey everyone, how's it going? Thanks for being here. I know it's a little bit later in the day, so we're all probably a little bit tired. And yeah, it's going to be a good session. We're going to do a really kind of quick speed workflow looking at integrating all the tools of Maxon, but we're also going to show you some other things that maybe aren't out yet. So in the next week, we're about to release a new product called Maxon Studio. And instead of just listening to me talk about it, I thought I'd show you a really quick video that shows you some of the great stuff you can do with it.
Ready to boost your video creations? Try Maxon Studio. Maxon Studio's got your back with a sleek dashboard that's like your own personal editing playground. We're talking dynamic capsules galore. Our capsules are designed to supercharge your content creation game inside After Effects. So say goodbye to staring at a blank screen wondering where to start. Maxon Studio hooks you up with pre-designed, customizable elements. The collection is always growing, from elegant motion graphics to seamless transitions, animated titles, and amazing effects. The best part is, you don't need to be a design wizard or spend hours tweaking every little detail, because user-friendly controls make it easy to tweak text, colors, and more to match your vibe. So, what are you waiting for? Start creating breathtaking videos today with Maxon Studio. Take it for a spin with our free 14-day trial. Level up your content now.
So yeah, that is a brand new asset library that's coming to Red Giant very soon. Can't quite say when, but I assure you it is very, very soon. So a little bit about me. My name is Elly Wade. I'm a creative artist and trainer for Maxon. I do a lot of things like live stream training, tutorials, quick tips, come to these events and get to talk to lovely people and meet the community. I'm based in Hertfordshire, and like a slightly useless fact about me, I'm a semi-professional footballer. So that's...
that's not semi-useless.
And yeah, if you want to follow me on Instagram, you can. It's @itwaselly. I do a lot of like reels and tutorials on there. If you have any questions for me, then yeah, just drop me a DM.
Hi, my name is Rodolfo Silva, and I'm a ZBrush trainer at Maxon. And I specialize in ZBrush, game art, tech art, the game engines, and environment art, particularly. And I thought it was very important for me to include that I'm an absolute Lord of the Rings geek, and that it's very important for any sort of like technical talks and whatever. I'm based in Germany, in our HQ in Bad Homburg, right? And I do teaching demos, live streaming. I do ZBrush Live, and I do ZBrush Central also. I engage with the community there. I also come in here to events such as these and talk to you guys and do demos and answer any questions and actually engage with the community. So yeah. So if, in my case, it's not just a link, it's a QR code. So if you want to scan that and have all my links there. So yeah.
So a little bit about Maxon and what Maxon is. So we create all of these wonderful pieces of software, some of which you might know, some you might not. So we have Cinema4D, which is our 3D software package. We have RedShift for rendering, Red Giant, which if you're into like your visual effects and your compositing, you may be aware of. And then the industry-leading sculpting app, which is ZBrush. And then we also have Forger, which is our iOS sculpting app. And Maxon 1 is the accumulation of all of these tools. So when you hear us talking about Maxon 1, this is the thing that we are talking about. And we're very big on integrating the tools together. And here's a quick reel just to show you what can be done. Cool. So at Maxon, we're very big on integrating our tools together. The benefit of us all working together at Maxon is we can develop plugins and ways to connect each of our applications. And so this is a big part of what me and Rodolfo are going to talk about today. Not only the integration, but how it can help us speed up and make our workflows far more efficient. So that's sort of what we're going to focus on today. We're going to show you a whole pipeline that goes from ZBrush into Substance Painter, into Cinema4D, and then into RedShift and a little bit of Red Giant, because we're not necessarily compositing professionals, but we can show you a little bit of the integration. So yeah, bear with me when I do show you that. But yeah, so we're going to do a very quick version of this pipeline and just talk a lot about the integration between the two, as well as plugins like Cineware and GoZ. So yeah, this is kind of the overview of what we're going to show you. And then I'm going to hand over to Rodolfo, who's going to show you the ZBrush and the Substance Painter side of things.
Hey, so, whoa, that's loud. Okay. Yes. So I created this this revolver all inside of ZBrush for this presentation. I decided to just run through the entire process for hard surface modeling and sculpting and a few techniques within ZBrush, and then the possibility to get into a ZBrush to Substance pipelines, Cinema4D, RedShift, all from using GoZ, basically. So basically what I do is I usually start off with a spotlight sketch. Like any reference pictures that you just have the ability to tweak that directly inside a spotlight. And then using Snapshot 3D, you can actually project that as a mesh, a Dynamesh mesh within ZBrush, and use that for concepting a lot. This is something that I'm very familiar with in terms of workflow for props, environmental props, and in this case, a weapon. Then using Gizmo primitives to go through and get the thickness of the weapon, just to start off by slicing. You can start use your slice brush. In this case, it's the knife curve brush, but the slice curve brush to separate your very rough mesh into separate polygroups. And then as you Dynamesh that, you get separate meshes within the same subtool, right? And this is very useful for you to start breaking down each piece into separate pieces for hard surface particularly. And after that, we go into some refining, basically. And some of the meshes are a little bit more organic, kind of in between, like the handle. And what you usually do is, well, in my case, because that's the beauty of ZBrush, you can do multiple different workflows and achieve the same result. Depends on the artist. But in my case, I decided to use Dynamesh and some clay brushes and polish brushes, just get the rough kind of volumetric feel of that shape. And then as I did that, I used Z Modeler. It's coming up, really. So basically refining the shapes and then using Z Modeler and the Gizmo deformers, in this case bend curve, to just tweak the shape to make it a little different than the original reference. Maybe you want to make it a little more exaggerated. Maybe you want to change the overall art direction of the piece, whatever it is. In this case, it's not a very complex piece. It's still just a revolver, but you know. So after you do that, eventually there's a phase where you do some refining of the shape. So I usually go through and I try to make all the edges and the surfaces as clear as possible for ZBrush, and then use the slice curve brush to get polygroups out of that. And using that, you can go through ZRemesher and tell it to keep those group sections, and it uses that to nail in the topology and the edge flow. This is particularly useful, obviously, for more organic shapes that require specific edge flow for animation. But in this case, too, where you can just reduce the topology using ZRemesher, and then as you have a low poly mesh, you can project back basically do UVs, that's a big one. And then in this case, I'm showcasing the new UV map shortest path thing, which is basically we have seam cutting in ZBrush now with Z Modeler, right? We can cut the seams precisely where we want, and it's no longer dependent on polygroups. And then you project back that detail using project history, so we get the same detail we had with our Dynamesh, but now we have subdivisions and we have UVs, and we can tie in some surface noise, for example, to get that wood grain and that different variation to the surface, right? So this is basically one of the approaches for certain parts of the mesh that are a little less, let's say, boxy in a sense. But another thing that I do a lot in hard surface is basically a combination of Z Modeler, array mesh, and live booleans. So live booleans are basically interactable. That means you can change the mesh and it can still preview what it's going to look like after the boolean is the operation is executed. So I'm using Gizmo primitives plus the little cones. The little cones are kind of like the initialize button, but it's interactable, and you can see that in real time. And then creating very basic shapes with some deformers, such as the extender, which allows you to get like basically edge loops around the mesh automatically, and then iterate that non-destructively. And as you do that, you get a very very basic shape for that drum. And I decided to go for the drum because it exemplifies array mesh perfectly for the little bullet holes, right? And the little details around the drum. So basically, I duplicate that mesh, go to array, fixate the pivot in the center. So I do lock position. That as you move anything, it will basically keep the pivot within the center of the original object, right? So you can rotate that around and then make the cuts, then use live booleans with array mesh together. And you can preview that. You can still model this even as live booleans applied. So you can do ZModeler, you can do like priority change, and it's reliant on the subtool order and the subtool folders, and also subtool live boolean groups, right? So I'm doing some ZModeler operations over there, and you can see it's applying to all array meshes, and it's still cutting with the live booleans, right? So high poly beveling is something I really wanted to at least showcase to some extent. So I'm using a Spotlight Alpha to project a mesh, and this is super high density. It's a Dynamesh, and it's very high poly. How do we bevel that? We have Bevel Pro within ZBrush, which allows you to bevel any mesh, basically, regardless of poly count. And this is perfect if you're doing a cut of like a stencil or something, because you don't want, if you're baking normal maps for a game asset or a game prop or whatever, you don't want like straight 90-degree angle edges, otherwise you won't get anything on the normal map, right? So that is perfect for that. You just do a slight little bevel, and then you cut that in, and you can bake that into your normal map. Same thing with the retopology. I use ZBrush, and most of the people who know me even before I joined Maxon, I use ZBrush for everything when it comes to modeling. When I was doing game environments for Unreal, I would do like 99% of the modeling with ZBrush. UVs was like 50% ZBrush, and the rest is Substance usually, right? So ZModeler retopology is something that would be akin to something like the Maya's Quad Draw, if you're familiar with that in terms of retopology tools. It's basically the same thing, but faster. I don't want to trash on the competition, but, you know, it is. So who cares? So ZModeler retopology works in the same way. It's snapping to the surface. It's basically ZModeler with a few tweaks. It's the same brush. You can make it your own ZModeler retopology tool. And you can extrude a single edge. You can extrude a partial edge just by holding tab. And it's very intuitive and very straightforward, as you can see. So the second method would be the old school method. And for people who have been using ZBrush since, I don't know, like ZBrush 3 or whatever, I don't know if there's any in the room, this has been added long ago. I think it was 3.5 or something. So it's Z-sphere retopology, which allows you to be super precise. It's way more precise than any other method of retopology, but it is slower. That's the caveat to it. It's a little slower, but if you want to have very, very precise control of your edges and your points and whatever, this is what you would do, and it uses adaptive skin. So it allows you to have a low poly cage and then a Dynamesh cage. So if it's adaptive skin, you know you can turn on Dynamesh, and it generates Dynamesh with polygroups, right, which is very, very useful. So this is the second method. I used all of these methods for the gun that you're seeing because I wanted to showcase all of that. So the third one is the topology brush, which is my favorite one, to be honest. Like, this is basically a curve brush. So you just drag and draw the topology, the edge flow that you want. And as you do cross sections on that edge flow, ZBrush generates those quads for you, basically. So you're doing an artistic process of just drawing out a sketch of your edge flow. And then as you draw the cross hatching, let's say, of that sketch, you get the topology, right? So it's very, very intuitive, very, very straightforward. And then you have, from the ZBrush to Substance Painter part of the workflow, I use, since we have polygroups, especially if you apply those live booleans, you get the polygroups from the cut, the subtractive mesh, onto the resulting boolean mesh, right? So if you get that, you can apply polypaint to any of those polygroups. You can even apply polypaint by polygroups. But in this case, I wanted to keep everything blue, red, green, and blue, or in between of those colors to get IDs for Substance. Because then in Substance, you separate those materials, and that would be in real life. Basically, I'm thinking, okay, anything that's wood would be red. Anything that's like a black, darkish metal would be blue. Anything that's kind of like gold would be green. And then as you get that in your high poly, you name your subtools, right? So that's very important. Naming is important. That is something I wanted to emphasize because I don't follow that rule a lot of the time. So, I don't think anyone does, but naming is very, very important for baking, right? So if you name your subtools exactly like that, and then you just add underscore low, underscore high to whatever your subtools are, using visibility sets in ZBrush, because we have like 8 visibility sets, which means you can interchange between all of your low poly and all of your high poly with a press of a button. And you have that, basically what you would have is export sets, right, as well. So when you export your low poly and your high poly have the same naming, and you can see this is basically running through the bake. You can see the poly paint coming through right there. See that? That was like a 1-second thing, but whatever. So as you bake that poly paint, it makes it easier for you to use it in your smart materials. So if you have, for example, multiple props that you're making for a scene or whatever, or a character, or like parts of the armor, and you follow the same code, wood is red, black metal is like awesome, but like black metal is blue, and then gold is green throughout all of your props. If you have a smart material that takes advantage of those color IDs, it's just dragging and dropping in Substance, right? Because it's the same kind of color code. So, and this is basically a breakdown of the smart material. Again, I just made an example out of the wood. It's just some base layers, some sub layers with some generators as well, applying curvature to certain areas, like to do that wear and tear of the edges of the parts where the gun would be, if it lies down on the floor, that's the parts that will be touching, so it will naturally wear a little bit more. So stuff like that is very important to think about. And then roughness variations using again the generators and parts of the modeling and the sculpting. This is the reason why I used surface noise, for example, in ZBrush instead of just painting a tileable texture on top and with Substance, because you can take advantage of that with your mesh maps as you bake the curvature, right? Because it gets that grittiness and that detail of the wood, especially if it's old wood. If it's like very, very varnished wood, then I don't see the point, right, of having that in ZBrush. But you can do that if you have some wear there. And I wanted to have like this feel of being like a very old kind of revolver, right? Civil War revolver, of course, it has the ZBrush logo, which kills the illusion. But, it's not, they didn't have ZBrush in the Civil War. Otherwise, they wouldn't go to war. So, so that's kind of the point. So, yeah, this is basically me breaking down the material. You can see the color ID still working. And, yeah, that's it. There's a lot of those materials are smart materials from Substance. I just wanted to make a single one as an example for you guys. And then we have GoZ, which is something I use a lot to bring stuff into Cinema4D and then give it a heli, basically. So GoZ is a thing that I've shown before downstairs, some people in this room. And it's basically a one-button solution for you to export a bunch of subtools directly into Cinema4D, Maya, 3ds Max, any other application that you guys are using in supports to GoZ. We're showcasing Cinema4D because it's like super fast. Literally, you click a button, you click the visibility button, and it exports directly into Cinema. And then as you change something in ZBrush, you click the button again, and it updates into Cinema, which is really, really useful. So if you have your visibility sets with your naming, and you have basically a visibility set with your high poly, a visibility set with your low poly, you're basically having exporting sets with GoZ, because you can export with GoZ using visibility, right? So now I'm handing it over to Elly to showcase the Cinema4D part and the RedShift to rendering and materials. Here you go.
Hello again. So yeah, my part of this process was to take it into the software that I'm familiar with, which is Cinema4D and RedShift. And so that was really just to take advantage of the asset browser, because we made this project kind of for this presentation. So not having a lot of time to do things means I can take advantage of certain things inside of C4D, like the asset browser and the placement tools for my environment and my scene building. And then, of course, I can head over to RedShift for my lighting, texturing, and rendering. And this is kind of what I'm going to show you over the next, maybe under 10 minutes, hopefully. So yeah, as I said, I didn't have a lot of time to build the whole scene, and I am not as proficient in ZBrush or with any kind of modeling. So I thought I'd take advantage of our lovely asset library. And so this is a library full of textures, models, assets, HDR images, all RedShift optimized as well. And then we can just drag and drop into our scene, and we can begin to build, and we can begin to create. And this is updated monthly, and we have industry and studio professionals create all of our content for us. and it's available for anyone who uses Cinema4D. So here I'm just kind of like flicking through the different things inside of the asset browser for you to see. And then something that doesn't really get a lot of love are the placement tools. And so this is a feature that came in a good few releases ago. And those of you who are Cinema4D users, if there are some here, you'll remember back in the day, we used to have to go to our 4 views. And if we wanted to put something onto a table, we had to kind of, mess with the y-axis like repeatedly until we didn't have any intersections. The placement tools do it all for us. So we can literally just grab the revolver or the bullets, select the place tool, and we can throw it on there. We can scale it up and rotate it, and it's going to connect everything for us. We can choose the up axis, just to make sure everything is right that we're doing here with the bullets. You can see, yeah. Cool, so to talk about my favorite thing, which is RedShift. So if you know me, you know I talk about this a lot of the time. And let's talk about integration, because this is the biggest thing for me. So RedShift recently was made the default renderer inside of Cinema4D. And this doesn't just mean it's now the default render. It means that now when we look at our lights, our environments, our materials, when we have RedShift selected as our render engine, these are all the RedShift specific lights. So no longer do we have to worry about creating the wrong things, because when it comes to working with RedShift, we do need to make sure we are using the correct lights, the correct materials, all of those things, because it is a PBR workflow to get some nice sort of slightly realism. So this is just me running through the lighting process here, which was very simple, just using a dome light, again, in the asset browser, taking a HDRI image, and then throwing in some area lights just to make it sort of look a little bit nice, ready for texturing with those lovely substance textures. So substance paint and materials, there's a couple of different ways that we can use these inside of RedShift. First of all, because Rodolfo created the texture sets, so for the revolver, I had an individual set of textures. All I had to do is throw them in the node editor. And it's a little bit of a manual process. But the whole point is I've only got one texture set for the one model. And so even though it is kind of 6 or 7 things to set up, once it's done, it's done. We've got our roughness maps, we've got our normal maps, our displacement. So all I'm doing here is really just connecting these together. And then once it's done, that entire material is done. But what we also have is a slightly new update to our Substance Importer plugin. So who here uses Substance? Lots of people. Okay, so what you can now do inside of Cinema4D and RedShift is we have this little Substance node. So you can load in your SBSAR file, and then it's a live link. So it's going to have access to all the open parameters inside of RedShift. So not only can I now animate them inside of here and edit them, but if I go back into Substance and I update it, it's going to update live in my model and my material. So I no longer have to worry about baking out my textures again and then uploading them again. It's all just going to do it all nice and quick for me. And so again, this is where we talk about the efficiency and the great integration with not only our own tools, but the likes of Adobe Substance. So a big topic that I get asked about all the time, as I said, I'm kind of like the RedShift girl at Maxon, is how can I get faster renders inside of RedShift? And you can. This is the thing that we talk about most, is how fast RedShift is as a render engine. And by using what I call the optimization workflow, which sounds very fancy, it's really just going through local and global samples. You then go through your GI. We can take advantage of irradiance caching, and this speeds things up instead of using like a brute force method. And then we can also look at trace steps, which are ray bounces. And I did a live stream on this recently, which is on the Maxon Training Team YouTube channel, shameless plug, where I go through this whole workflow and I'm just sort of like iterating live, and we're able to then get much faster render times. And so, yeah, 1 minute 17 is actually pretty fast anyway. It was only a kind of still frame. But if you look at the percentage of time saved, you can see 1 minute 17 to 20 seconds just by diving into this optimization workflow. And so we are able to get some nice optimization. So if you are a RedShift user, or if you're keen to start learning RedShift, then I would recommend checking out that live stream and kind of the other live streams that we do. Second shameless plug. There's a third at the end, don't worry. Finally, as I said, I'm not much of a compositor. I'm not very kind of proficient in any kind of compositing, but I wanted to talk about how you can take advantage of including or incorporating RedShift with the likes of Red Giant and After Effects and other compositing tools. So we have an AOV workflow inside of RedShift. So we're able to create and set up different render passes, so reflections, refractions, cryptomats, puzzle mats, all the kind of things that you might want, like depth passes. We can load those into our AOV manager. We can create a multi-layered OpenEXR file, which we can then render out for either a still frame or for our animation. And then we're able to bring this into After Effects. So please enjoy 30 seconds of the only stuff I know how to do inside of Red Giant and After Effects, which is load in your OpenEXR file. We can use the extractor to take out those different layers or those different render passes. And we can do really quite advanced things. So we could have a daytime scene. If we have our light passes, we can turn it into a nighttime scene without having to re-render our animation, which, as we know, render times can be long. So we don't really want to have to do that. So this workflow is really great. For me, as I said, not very skilled, but I always love to do a little bit of color grading. So with the help of Red Giant and Magic Bullet, they have some great presets, as well as amazing tools for, transitions, different types of visual effects. You saw the Maxon Studio video at the start of the scene. And so then you can see all the great stuff that we're able to do inside of Red Giant now using Maxon Studio. That's going to help me a lot. So yeah, I wanted to fly through that because I know we haven't got loads of time. But as we said, we're downstairs anyway at the booth. But if you want to learn more from the team, not just us, we have a massive team. We teach all of the things all the way through all the different tools. So feel free to check out our YouTube channels, all the live streams that we do on there. These are just some of the sessions that we do. We've got like Maxon Color, we've got VFX and Chill, we've got ZBrush Live, I think is daily, right? You're streaming daily.
But yeah, ZBrush Live has like actual like individual artists like that are independent that just stream there. But me and Ian, we're the trainers, and we go in there as well and do ZBrush Live Q&A sessions if you're interested. So yeah, that's the thing. Cool.
We also have ZBrush Classroom and Cinema4D. So if you want to get started and you want to learn any of the tools from scratch, then I'd recommend these are like our educational platforms, a little bit more sort of like course-based as opposed to just the free-for-all that is YouTube. Thank you.